Hi, thank you for joining me in my study. Early this morning, I sent off to Springer Verlag the completed proofs of my new book on God and abstract objects. The last several days, I have been spending every day, all day, proofreading the proofs, doing the corrections for this book, and it turned out to be a massive job. The book is going to be well over 500 pages long, so it's a massive undertaking. Let me give you a preview of what's involved in this book. The book falls into 4 parts. Part 1 is an introduction to the problem posed by abstract objects to divine aseity, or God's independence and self-existence. In this part of the book, I introduce the essential terms of the discussion, such as Platonism, realism and anti-realism, abstract object, concrete object, and so on. And then I lay out the biblical and philosophical and theological foundations for the doctrine that God is the sole ultimate reality, the only self-existent being, and the creator of everything else that exists. Finally, I explain the challenge to divine aseity posed by Platonism, which is the view that there are eternal, necessary, uncreated, abstract objects, for example, mathematical objects, so that God is not the sole ultimate reality. In part 2, I then discuss realist solutions to this challenge. Realist solutions admit that mathematical objects exist, but maintain that they do not exist independently of God. And I discuss 2 versions. In one chapter, I talk about absolute creationism, which is a sort of modified Platonism that holds that there are abstract objects, but that these have been created by God along with concrete objects. Then in the second chapter of this part, I talk about divine conceptualism, which says that mathematical objects and propositions, possible worlds, and so on, are not really abstract objects, rather they are thoughts in the mind of God, so that divine thoughts play the role normally assigned by Platonists to abstract objects. Then in part 3, I examine anti-realist responses to the challenge posed by Platonism to divine aseity. Anti-realism holds that there really are no mathematical objects or other abstract objects. And so I have several chapters reviewing different versions of anti-realism. For example, I discuss free logic and substitutional quantification. There's a chapter on what I call ultima facie, interpretations of mathematical discourse, which offer paraphrases of mathematical sentences that avoids commitment to the reality of mathematical objects. I have a chapter of some length on fictionalism, which says that mathematical sentences are in fact false, or at least untrue. I have a chapter on pretense theory, which says that mathematical language is just a matter of make-believe, rather like fictional characters. Then there's a chapter on neo-Meinongianism, which says that mathematical terms do refer to objects, all right, but these objects do not exist, and therefore they needn't be created by God. And finally, I look at a view called neutralism, which holds that the typical devices that the Platonist identifies as ontologically committing to abstract objects are really quite neutral with regard to ontological commitments. And therefore we can affirm the literal truth of mathematical sentences without being committed to the reality of mathematical objects. Finally, in part 4, I wrap up the entire discussion by summarizing our conclusions and lay out a kind of synoptic view that attempts to draw the best elements from all of these different solutions that I've discussed to argue that the theist need not be worried by Platonism, but that we have ample resources for meeting this challenge.